Lacerta Files Part 4 of 2 is the final segment of Part 2, the second meeting with Lacerta at an undisclosed location. They moved their meeting to an unknown location after Old K felt he was being watched and followed for safety reasons. This portion of Part 2 is being brought to you by Space the Final Frontier, Above and Beyond, an open-minded channel. Lacerta's second meeting has been made into 4 segments for your viewing pleasure. As always, this video is for entertainment only and not intended for any other use. The following statement given by Old K. The meeting began with an appraisal of diverse questions and opinions which I had gotten from readers of the first transcript in anonymous fashion through distribution from my trustworthy friends. Some of these opinions, altogether there were over 14 pages of paper, contained comments shaped by everything from a radically religious to a fanatical tendency to welcome contact with a reptilian species. I once again reaffirm that the following text is the absolute truth and is not fiction. It was composed from 3 original tape recordings, which were made with a tape recorder during my second interview with the reptilian creature known as Lacerta, at Lacerta's request. The reason for the shifting of the date and time of the second meeting was a possible observation and surveillance of my own person after the publication of the first transcript. Although everything was attempted on the advice of Lacerta to keep my identity a secret, just 2 days after the dissemination of the document abroad, and various unusual events took place. Please don't think that I am paranoid. However, I believe that the publication of the interview has drawn either official attention or the attention of some organization to me. It began with a failure of my telephone for several hours. When the phone became operational once again, there were quiet echoes and strange clicking and whirring sounds when I made calls. A defect could, ostensibly, not be found anywhere. Overnight, important data disappeared from the hard drive in my computer. The testing program reported defective sectors where, strangely enough, there were only data which dealt with illustrations and completed textual material from the interview. These defective sectors also contained material of a paranormal nature in the field of my research. Fortunately, the material was also stored on floppies. In addition, I discovered by pure chance some hidden data in a likewise hidden directory index. The name which appeared on the data in the directory index was E72UJ. A friend who is a computer expert could not make anything of this designation, and when I was about to show it to him, the directory index had disappeared. One evening, my apartment door was standing wide open, my TV set was running, and I am absolutely confident that I had turned the TV set off. A minivan with British markings and the imprint of a Europe-wide supermarket chain parked in front of my house. I noticed the same minivan again on several occasions, traveling at a distance behind my car, even when I visited the town of 65 kilometers away. When I returned, the car was on the other side of the street once again. I never saw anyone get into or out of the car. A knock on the door of the vehicle and on the tinted windows caused no reaction of any kind. After about 2 weeks, the minivan disappeared again. When I informed EF personally about these events, he suggested that I change the place and date of the meeting in order to assure our own and Lacerta's safety. The meeting took place on April 27, 2000, in another isolated location. It was unobserved as far as I can determine. Once again, all of this may sound strange and paranoid, like a fantasy from a cheap science fiction film. However, I can only repeat to and assure the reader once again, all of this is the unadulterated truth. Believe my words or don't believe them. These things have happened, and they will continue to happen, whether you believe it or not. Until it is too late. Our civilization is in danger. Part 4 of 2. Questions and Answers. Many readers of the first transcript have posed the question how your original contact with EF came about. I already know the story from your narratives, but could you repeat it here once again for this volume and for the new transcript?
Of course. Now, the story began about 2 of your years ago here in Sweden. I have been strongly interested in your species and your behavior since my youth. I had already studied your literature at that time, as well as possible. Naturally, it is not easy in my homeland to come into possession of human books. But since my group or family stands in a higher ranking order, I was able to gather some material together and sometimes to speak with others of my kind who have already been in contact with you. I was really very curious about your species, and as soon as I was allowed to come to the surface, I attempted to assemble more information immediately. Above all, it was expressly forbidden for me to commence direct contact with humans, because in my position at that time, there existed no necessity for doing so. It was in your year 1998, when I was on my way further north from here in the remote forests in the vicinity of the entrance to my world, and was looking for biological specimens, which we use in order to watch over environmental pollution and destruction of your flora and fauna, statistically by your own kind. At the time, I was already on the return path to the entrance. We can even orient ourselves more easily, by the way, through our senses to the Earth's magnetic field, and already in the vicinity of the large lake, when much to my surprise, I came across a cabin in the woods. In this cabin, I sensed a human consciousness, awareness. It was EF. Actually, I had no permission for contact with another species, but by the same token, I had set in place my mimicry capability quite successfully prior to this. Even with larger groups of you, I had never ever come across a human being when I was alone. Now, let's call it primitive curiosity. I wanted to talk with the person in this cabin, and so I knocked on the door. E opened the door, and we got into an interesting conversation. His language was not quite yet common at that time for me, but it's not all that hard to learn a new language when one can read the information in the consciousness, awareness of the opposite individual. I simply told him that I came from a foreign country in the East. Of course, at the time, he did not really recognize who I was. He was totally convinced that he was talking with a creature of his own kind, although it was simply only a mimicry image. Since my assignment, anyway, had as its goal an investigation of this terrain, which was to last for several days, I visited him in this span of time 3 times as a human person. At first, we talked mainly about really ordinary things. Later, we got into religious and physical topics. He seemed to be impressed by my knowledge, and I was likewise impressed with his clear thoughts and his, for a human being, well-displayed personality structure and his own opinions. You really like giving yourselves over completely to a public opinion or conditioning, as for example, reptilian species are evil and stuff like that. I steered the conversation in this direction, and EF said something to the effect that he believed in alien species and that they did not have to necessarily be evil, but perhaps only different than his kind are. That pleased me. At that juncture of time, of course, I could not speak concretely with him about my knowledge, because he wouldn't have believed me. He would have taken me for a human practical joker. I cultivated the very, very unusual idea, for my kind, to show him my true exterior, something that I did during our conversation at our 4th meeting in the cabin. Actually, he was predestined for contact. He was open-minded, honest, intelligent, not religiously inclined or conditioned. He lived alone and isolated, and no one would believe him should he decide to go public with his story. I dared to take the step, but then I had serious doubt about the propriety of my act, especially when he reacted very violently. He got control of himself again after a time, and we could finally talk concretely about definite matters. Now he had no choice but to believe me. This was the beginning of a series of meetings which initially took place there in the woods, but later took place in his remote residence. Finally, he brought you into contact with me, and for that reason, we are now sitting here once again and talking about things which probably won't be believed out there in human society.
You said you would not have had permission at that time for contacts with human beings. Do you now then have permission to talk with EF and me about all these things, and even to make this scientifically public?
Yes, that is difficult to explain and for you to understand. Let's just say I find myself in the position now to arrange this permission without having to take into account any consequences. In this position, I am quasi-immune against certain restrictions. Let's look at that way. Yes,
If other people want to come into contact with your kind, do they have a chance to do so?
generally not. We avoid contact with you, and we operate on the surface only in remote areas. And there we use the mimicry techniques in case we should meet some people. That I am talking with you now does not mean that others will follow my example. It goes without saying that you could try to find an entrance to my world and penetrate your way into there. However, that can sooner lead to unpleasant consequences for the infiltrator. You have next to no chances on the surface of recognizing us. You can't even contact us directly. We have to contact you, just as I did with EF. Those kinds of contacts, however, are not the rule, but are very rare occurrences.
Can you describe your subterranean homeland location?
I can attempt to do so, but I certainly will not tell you where this place is located. My homeland lies in one of our smaller underground settlements to the east of here. I'll give you some numbers so that you can make a better impression for yourself. Just a minute. I have to try to convert the measurements approximately into your units. It is a dome-shaped cavern at a distance of about 4,300 meters from the Earth's surface. The cavern was organized as a colony about 3,000 years ago. A major portion of the ceiling structure is artificially integrated into the rock, and the form was remodeled into an almost elegantly proportioned and very flat dome with an oval ground plan. The diameter of the dome, according to your measures, is about 2.5 kilometers. The height of the dome, at the highest point, is about 220 meters. Underneath that highest point in every colony, there stands a special whitish-gray cylindrical building, a kind of supporting column which holds the honeycomb net-carrying structure of the dome. This building is the tallest, largest, and oldest in the entire dome, for it is always situated as the first construction together with the security of the ceiling. In the meantime, of course, there were times when it was completed and reconditioned. That building has a very special name and religious significance. We have only one of those columns. Larger colonies even have more columns, according to the construction of the ceiling. One of the main colonies in Inner Asia has, as an example, 9 of those kinds of supports, but that colony is also over 25 of your kilometers in size. The central building is generally a center of religion, but also a center for climate control and a center for the behavior and the regulation of the lighting system. We have at our location altogether 5 large artificial light sources which generate your UV light and its warmth through gravitational sources. The air shafts and the light systems from the surface likewise run through these columns, and naturally, they are very intensely controlled. By the way, we have 3 air shafts and 2 elevator systems there, and even a tunnel connection to the next main colony, which lies approximately 500 kilometers to the southeast. One elevator shaft leads to a cavern near the surface. The other leads to one of our depots for the ships. You remember the cylindrical ships that is naturally concealed closer to the surface behind a rocky mountain face. Normally, there are only 3 ships there. It's a small depot. The other buildings of the colony are, for the most part, concentrically ordered in oval circles around the main supporting column, and they are, without exception, much flatter. Generally only between 3 and 20 meters tall. The shape of the buildings is round and dome-like. The color is even differentiated according to circle and distance from the main column. To the north of the column, there is an additional, very large, but very flat round building. This building interrupts the concentric system of the colony with its diameter of about 250 meters. It is the artificial sun zone in which specially illuminated corridors and rooms are housed. In these locations, very powerful UV light predominates, and they are used in order to warm our blood. There is even a medical dispensary and a meeting room located there. Beyond the outer ring of the colony, there are zones in which animals are kept. You know, we must consume flesh as nourishment, and the gardens in which plant nourishment and mushroom culture are cultivated. There is also hot and cold running water there from subterranean sources. The power station is located on the edge of the colony. The station is driven by fusion as its base, and it supplies the colony and the suns with energy. My group, or family, lives, by the way, in the 4th ring of buildings out from the central support column. So much in such a short time. To describe to you all the buildings and their tasks would be going too far. It is difficult to describe something like that to you, for it is a completely different set of surroundings and culture from what you are accustomed to in your life on the surface. You really have to see it for yourself to be able to believe it.
Will I myself see it sometime?
Who knows? Maybe. Time brings new opportunities.
How many creatures of your kind live in this colony?
Approximately 900.
That is the end of the interview. Do you have any final message for the readers of the transcript?
Yes. I am thoroughly surprised at the many comments to my words. Of course, I am naturally also disappointed about the religious portrayals of me as the enemy which have been voiced and which have buried themselves deeply in your mind. You should learn to set yourselves apart from the old conditioning and not to stand quasi under the control of something or someone who has already been gone for 5,000 years. You are, after all, free spirits. Those are my final words.
This concludes the Lacerta Files Part 2. If you have enjoyed this retelling of the Lacerta Files, hit the like and subscribe button so you won't miss another edition of Space the Final Frontier Above and Beyond.